Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unraveling a global data mystery that honestly completely flips our assumptions about society, religion, and success. We're looking at an index where the results are literally the exact opposite of what the name suggests. To set the stage, listen to this really profound observation from a 19th century scholar named Muhammad Abdu. He traveled to the West and said he saw the principles of Islam but no Muslims. Then he went back east and saw Muslims but no Islam. Now, for over a century, that was kind of just treated as an interesting anecdote. But today, well, we actually have the hard data to prove it. And here is that staggering reality from the 2024 Islamicity Index. Non-Muslim majority countries absolutely dominate the top spots. We're talking Ireland taking number 1, followed right behind by Iceland and New Zealand. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia sits all the way down at number 100. It's just a massive, massive gap between a nation's religious identity and its actual real-world performance.
Section 1. Measuring values objectively.
So what does this index actually measure? Developed by the Islamicity Foundation and led by scholars like Professor Hossein Asghari, it definitely doesn't count how many people pray or fast. Instead, it asks a much tougher question. How closely do a country's institutions, its economy, and its human rights record align with the core societal teachings of the Quran? It's measuring a functioning society, not personal faith.
Section 2. The Universal Human Blueprint.
The very first premise introduces this idea of a universal human baseline, found right in the source text itself. This verse basically states that humans are created with a specific, innate nature, one that's structured to naturally recognize truth, order, and justice. So it's not something you have to learn from a specific religious group, it's more like it's pre-installed in the human software.
This innate nature is called fitrah, and the index essentially proves that you don't need a specific religious label to tap into it. When nations like Ireland or Iceland build systems that ensure the rule of law and economic equity, they are naturally aligning with this universal baseline. It's a cross-cultural reality that healthy, functional societies just naturally gravitate toward. Building on that idea, the text states that the human soul has this built-in compass for right and wrong. And those top-ranking nations? Well, they use this inspired conscience to suppress corruption and protect their most vulnerable citizens. They didn't really need a specific theological rulebook to tell them that bribery and extreme inequality are wrong. They just went ahead and built accountable institutions. The index uses very objective criteria to measure these exact legal and economic realities.
All of this really points to a shared human heritage. The source text explicitly states that this exact same ethical guidance was given to all historical prophets. Concepts like freedom, welfare, and equality, they aren't exclusive Western inventions. And they certainly aren't exclusive Muslim secrets either. They are literally the starting line for all of humanity.
Section 3. The Trap of Structural Idolatry. This brings us to a super fascinating historical observation from the text itself. It notes that nations and religious communities often fractured, regressed, or just grew complacent after being entrusted with revelation. And why is that? Mostly because of tribalism, political greed, or sectarian pride. Simply identifying as a Muslim state doesn't automatically, magically translate to an ethical society. People very often neglect the practical, heavy lifting of the message while slipping into corruption. For a really stark example of this, just look at the number 109. That is Turkey's rank in the 2024 index. So despite its deep historical ties to the Islamic world, political greed and economic backsliding have caused a really steep decline. A historical identity just cannot protect a nation if its actual day-to-day justice system is failing its people. And this brings us to a core theological concept: monotheism, or tawhid. When you apply this to societal governance, it demands that supreme loyalty belongs only to absolute cosmic laws of justice and truth, not to any earthly power. It really highlights the systemic failure of regimes that try to elevate themselves above these universal principles. Think about it like this. When a government elevates a dictator, an elite class, a political party, or even raw nationalism above universal human rights, they are committing structural idolatry. They're associating partners with absolute authority, and the absolutely abysmal scores of many autocratic regimes objectively reflect this. They're basically serving the whims of corrupt rulers instead of submitting to the absolute standards of human welfare.
Section 4. The Divine Contract of Action. Now, the data perfectly aligns with the concept of succession or khilafah and security. The text makes it incredibly clear. Societal rewards are strictly conditional upon righteous deeds and avoiding the idolatry we just talked about. True succession isn't about an authoritarian crown or some hereditary title. It is the measurable, physical reality of peace and stability.
So how is this promise actually fulfilled in the real world? Well, when nations prioritize systemic justice, ensure transparency, and foster citizen welfare, the index shows they naturally earn that promised security. The index is basically an empirical verification of this rule. On the flip side, the instability we see in lower-ranking nations is essentially a massive breach of contract. By tolerating corruption and oppression, they lose their security. Ultimately, the 2024 Islamicity Index functions less like a simple political scorecard and a lot more like a mirror of cosmic law. Societal promises are bound to righteous actions, not religious identities. Those top-ranking nations like Ireland, Iceland, and New Zealand are living proof. If you build institutions on fairness, integrity, and human welfare, you will naturally harvest the fruits of a just society.
The data proves that revelation is an active, ongoing contract. The text might historically belong to the Muslim world, sure, but the practical fruits belong to whoever actually puts in the effort to implement the values. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. If an ethical society requires action rather than just a shiny label, who in our modern world is truly doing the work? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this deep dive gave you a fresh perspective on how we measure the true success of a society.